Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really digging into a pretty big pile of documents. They're all focused on allegations about the FBI and the Department of Justice.
Yeah, quite a mix.
We've got a House Judiciary Committee report. It's called FBI Whistleblowers, what their disclosures indicate about the politicization of the FBI and Justice Department, plus a whole bunch of letters from Congress to people like Director Wray, Attorney General Garland,
Olson, Sanborn, Romero, lots of official correspondence.
Exactly. And we're also looking at articles from City Journal, Fix the FBI, and the Heritage Foundation, How to Fix the FBI. Then there's the Wikipedia page on FBI controversies, a Reddit thread about disbanding an FBI team on foreign influence.
Right.
And a DOJ Inspector General report about how the FBI handled 9/11 intelligence. That one mentions systemic failures. So our job today is basically to unpack all this. We want to understand the main claims, the evidence presented, and, the broader context.
And you sent these over because, well, you're trying to get a clear picture of the whole debate around the FBI right now, right? Like, what exactly are the worries people have? Who's voicing them?
Yeah.
And do we see any kind of patterns or common themes popping up when we look across all these different sources? We'll try to sort of guide you through it, hit the key points without getting totally bogged down.
Okay, great. Let's get into it. First up, some really pretty serious allegations about FISA. That's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act.
Yeah, FISA comes up a lot. Our sources, they point to findings from the DOJ's own Inspector General and even the FISA court itself, showing repeated FISA violations by the FBI.
Repeated violations.
That's what they say. And the House Judiciary report really stresses this allegation that FBI leadership might have tried to, downplay how serious these violations actually were. The IG found specifically lots of noncompliance with the FBI's internal Woods procedures.
Ah, the Woods procedures. Those are meant to ensure the facts in the FISA applications are accurate, right? Super important.
Exactly. They're a critical check. So, failures there. Well, they raise big questions about whether the FBI was following the rules for its most sensitive intelligence work.
And one of the biggest claims in these sources is that this FISA information, the stuff collected for foreign intelligence, was somehow misused, used for warrantless surveillance of Americans.
Yes, that's a major allegation. And the FISA court itself apparently raised concerns about queries using Section 702 data. Now, remember, that data is supposed to be collected mainly for foreign intelligence.
Right, foreign threats.
But the worry is it was being dipped into for domestic criminal cases. Things totally separate from foreign intelligence, like healthcare fraud, gang investigations, public corruption, bribery, stuff like that.
So using foreign surveillance tools for regular domestic investigations.
That's the concern. The FISC, the FISA court, specifically mentioned at least 4 times in 2021 where the FBI apparently didn't get a court order, a warrant, before accessing the actual content of info gathered under Section 702.
4 times that we know about. Wow.
So yeah, data collected legally for one purpose, foreign threats allegedly being used for another domestic crime without the usual warrant. It kind of sidesteps the normal legal process for domestic surveillance.
And the sheer volume seems significant, too. The report talks about a huge jump in these U.S. person queries under Section 702 between 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, that dramatic increase definitely makes you wonder about oversight, How broadly were they searching? It ties back to the core purpose of FISA. It's meant for national security, foreign intelligence, not really as a shortcut for domestic law enforcement on everyday cases.
Okay, moving on from FISA, another area these sources flag is something called sensitive investigative matters. SIMS, for short. What's going on there?
Well, this is interesting. There was apparently a secret FBI audit back in 2019, and it found widespread violations of the FBI's own rules for handling these SIMs.
Secret audit, okay. And SIMs are cases involving politicians, religious groups.
It's exactly. Public officials, political candidates, religious organizations, basically cases where there's a higher risk of political fallout or, damage to reputations. That's why they need special handling, more checks and balances.
And this audit found widespread problems.
Apparently so. They looked at about 350 cases, a bit more, and found 747 compliance errors.
Wait, 747 errors in just 353 cases? That sounds a lot, more than just occasional mistakes.
It does seem high, yeah. The errors included things like not getting the right supervisor approvals before starting these sensitive cases, not getting the necessary legal review done, failing to notify the local U.S. Attorney's Office properly.
So basic procedural safeguards weren't followed.
Seems that way in many instances. And maybe most concerning, over half the cases they audited involved domestic public officials. Plus, in 74 cases, there was apparently no investigative work done for over 90 days, just sitting there.
Investigations into sensitive targets just stalled.
That's what the report suggests. And on top of that, it says FBI headquarters allegedly didn't even tell the main DOJ about all the known SIMs in 33 different cases.
So, lack of transparency, procedural failures, it paints a concerning picture, especially for these high-stakes cases.
It really does. It raises questions about management, internal controls, and accountability. Have these issues actually been fixed since that 2019 audit? The sources suggest committee Republicans are still trying to find out.
Let's shift gears slightly. There's also talk about the alleged abuse of something called assessments. This sounds like maybe a lower level of scrutiny than a full investigation.
That's the core concern, yes. The bar for opening an assessment is reportedly lower. You don't need as much factual justification as you would for a full-blown investigation.
Okay.
And the allegation is that the FBI might be using these assessments to gather information pretty broadly, sometimes based on, well, what some people argue are pretty thin reasons.
Is there an example?
Yeah, the sources mention an assessment of a group called Concerned Women of America. Apparently, it was triggered by a charity rating they received, which just happened to have a category labeled intelligence.
A charity rating led to an FBI assessment? That seems like a stretch.
It does raise eyebrows, doesn't it? Critics argue the criteria for launching these assessments are just too vague, and they can involve quite a bit surveillance, searching databases, interviews, even using informants.
All without a clear crime being suspected.
Potentially, yes, without a strong factual or criminal predicate. The worry is this could open the door to investigating people or groups based more on their views or associations rather than actual suspicion of wrongdoing.
Okay, now let's get into something that feels like a really central theme in all these documents, this idea of internal politicization and bias within the FBI itself.
Right, this comes up again and again. And it's presented with some nuance, actually. There's a suggestion that, okay, maybe there's some political bias in the field offices, but it's perceived as being much worse, much more prevalent in Washington, D.C. at headquarters.
Interesting. And this leads to that theory mentioned in the sources, the two FBI's idea.
Exactly, the two FBI's theory. It kind of paints a picture of a split.
Okay, explain that.
So, FBI 1 is supposed to be the rank-and-file agents, the people out in the field offices. They're seen as mostly focused on doing their jobs traditional law enforcement, trying to stay out of politics, just serving.
And FBI 2?
That's described as the upper management in D.C., sometimes called company men. The perception or allegation is that they might be more focused on their own careers or on pushing political agendas, maybe directives from DOJ, even if it clashes with the Bureau's main mission.
And the claim is that this FBI 2 pushes politically sensitive cases onto FBI 1?
That's the accusation, yeah. And the sources offer some specific examples to back up these worries about politicization.
Like what?
Well, there are accounts of agents supposedly kneeling or clapping for protesters while they were on duty. Some apparently even got promotions or gift cards for it later, which, reportedly angered other agents who saw it as taking a political side. There's also talk about political photos being put up or taken down inappropriately in offices. Even employees apparently celebrating when a certain president left office. Things that some insiders felt were just unprofessional and showed bias.
And the January 6th investigations seem to feature heavily in these examples, too.
They do. There are allegations that some employees who volunteered for the J6 probe were openly biased, like saying things about wanting to go after those Trump supporters.
Wow.
Yeah, that kind of open animosity raises obvious questions about impartiality, doesn't it? Especially in such charged investigations. And then there are claims about the Hatch Act.
That's the law restricting political activity by federal employees, right? To keep things neutral.
Right. And the allegation is a double standard. Conservative employees supposedly get scrutinized for expressing views, maybe even on personal time, while others don't face the same issues. There's even one anecdote about a supervisor worrying about giving work to an agent just because they were seen as conservative.
So it sounds like a potentially really divided and politically charged atmosphere internally based on these accounts.
That's the picture painted by these whistleblower disclosures, yes.
Which leads to the next point. What happens to people who push back or raise concerns? Retaliation against employees and whistleblowers.
This is another really troubling area highlighted in the sources. The claims are quite stark that the FBI is actively trying to push out employees who don't go along with what's described as a woke leftist agenda, even using the word purge for conservative employees.
A purge. That's strong language.
It is, and disturbingly, there are specific claims of retaliation against at least one person who formally came forward as a whistleblower.
What kind of retaliation are we talking about?
Things like having their security clearances suspended, being suspended indefinitely from duty. And allegedly, this is happening for actions their lawyers say are protected, First Amendment speech, done on their own time, not breaking any laws.
Like what kind of speech?
The sources mention things like questioning the patriotism of veteran employees, which is obviously a very serious thing to be accused of. Other personnel actions are allegedly tied to employees holding what the Bureau labels conspiratorial views, or maybe expressing support for J6 events online.
And the lawyers are saying this is potentially unconstitutional.
Yes, violating free speech rights. And a key part of the allegation is the lack of due process.
Meaning
these suspensions are supposedly happening without the employee being told the specific facts behind the decision, or getting a real chance to challenge it or appeal it. The name Jennifer Moore, an HR official, comes up specifically in connection with revoking clearances and this alleged retaliation.
Okay, another really serious allegation is about manipulating data and statistics, specifically around domestic violent extremism, or DVE.
Yes, whistleblowers have reportedly alleged that DVE statistics are being, well, massaged or manipulated to fit the current administration's political narrative about the threat. The claim is there's pressure from supervisors to boost the number of DVE cases, that agents are incentivized, maybe through performance metrics for awards or promotions, to reclassify cases as DVE even if the evidence is weak. Some even allege pressure to essentially manufacture DVE cases.
Manufacture case.
That's the allegation. And the January 6th investigations reportedly feed into this as well.
How does J6 relate to the DVE stats?
According to the whistleblowers, the way J6 cases are categorized is part of the issue. The allegation is that by treating J6 cases as if they originated in various different field offices across the country, rather than being tied to one specific event in D.C., it can create a misleading picture.
Making it look like a nationwide surge in domestic terrorism that might be broader than it actually is.
Exactly. It could inflate the stats and suggest a more geographically dispersed threat. The concern isn't just about misleading statistics, though. It's also that padding the numbers like this might dilute the focus on genuine, serious violent extremism.
Okay, let's look outwards now. How do these sources describe the FBI's relationships with other important players, like the DOJ and Congress? Sounds like there might be some tension there.
That's a fair way to put it. There's a perception reflected in these documents that sometimes the politicization doesn't start within the FBI, but comes down from the DOJ in terms of directives on what to investigate or what to prioritize.
Is there an example given?
The memo from Attorney General Garland about investigating threats against school board members is frequently cited. Whistleblowers claim this led to investigations of parents who were just voicing concerns at meetings. And the creation of that EDUOFFICIALS threat tag is mentioned in this context.
Right, that tag caused controversy about free speech, didn't it?
It did. Concerns were raised about potentially chilling parent speech and involvement. And beyond specific directives, some agents reportedly worry about political bias when they work with assistant U.S. attorneys on cases. The sort of overarching claim from some sources is that both the FBI and DOJ have become too political as institutions.
And what about Congress? The relationship with Republicans seems particularly strained, judging by all the letters we have here.
Absolutely. A major theme is the accusation that the FBI is stonewalling, or at least failing to respond adequately, to requests for documents and information from Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee who are looking into these very issues of politicization and bias.
Lots of letters from Jim Jordan, Mike Johnson.
Yes, and signed by many other Republican representatives, too. They detail unanswered requests, demand briefings, ask very specific questions. And the sources often contrast this alleged lack of cooperation with how the FBI provided information to the January 6th Select Committee. Some see that contrast as evidence of partisan bias in how the Bureau deals with Congress.
Okay, another relationship under scrutiny is the one between the FBI and big tech companies.
Yeah, this is a significant area of concern in the materials. There's evidence presented suggesting the FBI has been involved in influencing censorship of Americans' political speech online. Well, there are allegations that guidance from the FBI shaped some of Facebook's content moderation policies leading up to the 2020 election. This includes the decision to suppress the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop.
Right, that was hugely controversial.
Extremely. And beyond that, whistleblowers have apparently claimed there's a kind of special relationship where Facebook voluntarily gives the FBI information about users' private political messages or posts. That obviously raises huge privacy and free speech alarms.
Definitely. Now, another point made is about the FBI's focus shifting more towards being intelligence-driven. What are the worries about that?
The main concern is about the quality and purpose of that intelligence. If the intelligence being gathered is inaccurate, or if it's politically motivated, or if it doesn't really reflect genuine threats, then it's not very useful, is it? It could even be harmful, leading resources astray.
So chasing ghosts instead of real threats.
That's the accusation, that the FBI might be targeting people who aren't actually dangerous, perhaps to meet certain metrics or fit a narrative, instead of focusing on preventing actual crimes. There's a claim that groups are sometimes labeled as threats just to, check a box or justify an intelligence report, even if it's not really appropriate.
Is there an example of that?
The most cited example is that intelligence report from the FBI's Richmond office. It warned about radical traditionalist Catholic ideology as a potential threat indicator.
Based on what?
Reportedly, it cited the Southern Poverty Law Center as a source. The report was widely condemned as inappropriate and was eventually rescinded by FBI leadership. But it's used as an example of flawed or biased intelligence gathering. There's also a feeling described among some agents that some of the intelligence gathering they're required to do feels pointless, like just bureaucratic box checking, not generating truly useful intel.
The sources also list quite a few specific case examples that seem to tie into these broader themes. Can you run through a couple of those?
Sure. There are allegations that the DOJ and FBI aren't pursuing investigations into attacks on pro-life clinics or churches as vigorously as some think they should. We already mentioned the assessment of Concerned Women of America, which looked like investigating a conservative charity under potentially thin pretenses. Then there's the pipe bomb investigation from January 6th, the bombs planted at the RNC and DNC headquarters. Concerns are raised that this investigation hasn't been prioritized compared to prosecuting J6 protesters.
Okay. What else?
The Whitmer kidnapping plot in Michigan is mentioned. Specifically, the FBI's heavy use of confidential informants and allegations that they might have encouraged or even entrapped the defendants. Very controversial case.
Right.
And of course, the handling of information related to Hunter Biden allegations of downplaying negative information or trying to limit its spread. There's also an example of an FBI field office opening a case against Republican state officials based just on a complaint from a Democrat official about an online terroristic threat aimed at school board members.
Seems like a lot of politically charged examples.
There are more. The FBI having a secure workspace inside the offices of Perkins K., a law firm heavily associated with the Democratic Party since 2012 that's noted. The warnings the FBI gave social media companies about Russian disinformation before the 2020 election, followed by the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story that's central.
Any others stand out?
Yeah, the Schoharie limousine crash in New York. The owner, Shahid Hussein, was apparently a longtime FBI informant with a history of shady dealings, raising questions about what the FBI knew and when. Representatives Stefanik, Turner, and Jordan sent a letter about this.
Okay.
And the FBI raid on Project Veritas founder James O'Keefe's home, related to Ashley Biden's diary. That raised questions about protections for journalists and press freedom. Jordan Ben Johnson wrote to Garland about that one, too. Finally, the case of Ian Freeman, convicted over a crypto scheme, whose lawyer called the charges absolute nonsense.
It's definitely worth remembering. As you said, these are allegations presented in these sources. In some cases are still playing out. And just to add some historical perspective, that Wikipedia source reminds us of past FBI controversies, too. Things like COINTELPRO, Ruby Ridge, Waco, the Clinton email investigation.
Right. And the 9/11 Commission report, or rather the related IG report we mentioned earlier, which found those systemic failures in intelligence sharing and analysis back then. It shows that scrutiny of the FBI, its power, and its methods isn't exactly new.
That's a really important point. This isn't happening in a vacuum. That 9/11 IG report highlighting failures in intelligence definitely echoes some of the concerns we're hearing now about data and intelligence focus, doesn't it?
It does resonate, yeah. History maybe not repeating, but certainly rhyming, perhaps.
And finally, just circling back to Congress. The sheer number of letters we looked at, mainly from House Judiciary Republicans Jordan, Johnson, Gates, Roy, Bishop, and many others, it really drives home how intense the current oversight effort is, at least from that side of the aisle.
No question. They are demanding documents, briefings, answers on very specific points about misconduct, bias, retaliation. It shows a deep level of concern and, frankly, distrust from a significant group within Congress.
And we should also acknowledge the different viewpoints in the materials. We have those articles from City Journal and Heritage calling for pretty major reforms. Some even suggest breaking up the FBI, separating intelligence from law enforcement.
Right. Those are policy prescriptions based on these criticisms. Then you have the Reddit thread, which is more like a public snapshot. You see some people worried about foreign interference, others echoing the criticisms of the FBI we've discussed. It's a mixed bag.
And that poll data you mentioned.
Yeah, the APM Research Lab poll. It showed a noticeable split along party lines in trust towards the FBI. Democrats generally have higher trust than Republicans. That kind of quantifies the political challenge the Bureau faces in being seen as impartial by everyone.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've seen serious allegations about FISA abuse, potential warrantless surveillance, questions about how sensitive investigative matters are handled, whether internal rules are followed, big concerns about political bias inside the Bureau, this to FBI's idea, claims of retaliation against whistleblowers, accusations of manipulating DVE stats for political reasons.
Right. Plus, strained relationships with parts of Congress and with big tech over content moderation. And this whole shift towards an intelligence focus that might be flawed or misused, the sources, especially from Congress, show a real push for answers and accountability.
So for you listening, understanding these debates around the FBI's actions, well, it's pretty crucial, isn't it? If you care about law enforcement integrity, civil liberties, how our democracy functions, these aren't small issues. They touch on really basic questions of trust, accountability, and the limits of government power.
Absolutely. These are fundamental issues.
So given everything we've unpacked today, the sheer range and seriousness of these concerns, the calls for significant reform, it really makes you think, doesn't it? What should the FBI's role look like in the future? And maybe, what's our responsibility as citizens in making sure it stays apolitical, impartial, and focused on justice under the law? What other questions does all this raise for you about that balance between keeping us safe, protecting our rights, and just the basic perception of fairness in our country?